In the far reaches of the galaxy, humanity's talent for adaptation and learning had always been underestimated. Sure, they had innovative minds and curiosity, but one unique skill had set them apart from all other species in the Milky Way: languages. Humans could learn them, not just translate or interpret. Humans could actually speak in a foreign tongue, slip into the cultural nuances, and even master dialect that stumped other species' best AI interpreters. This ability, often overlooked, was humanity's secret superpower. In a galaxy of hundreds of species, each with its own syntax, phonetics, and traditions, communication was a struggle for even the most advanced species. Galactic Unison, a diplomatic hub, had managed to standardize trade and policy communication through translators, but subtleties and hidden meanings were lost. Cultural misunderstandings led to miscommunications, and often, to wars. Enter Mira Kalev, a young human woman raised on Earth, but with a knack for language acquisition that rivaled anyone from the polyglot corps. She was fluent in 16 languages, each from a different species, able to not only understand, but deeply grasp the social intricacies behind each. This gift made her invaluable to the Galactic Union's diplomatic team, but she carried something deeper. The elders called it chaining, the ability to link languages into sequences, mentally shifting from one syntax and cultural mindset to another in an instant. But she wasn't just good with words. Mira was precise, down to the smallest detail. In the diplomatic world, those details mattered immensely. On her most recent mission to the outer reaches of the Galactic Rim, she was tasked with negotiating peace between two warring factions, the Vaslitions, an amphibious species known for their volatile outbursts, and the Zixians, a hive-minded race with little room for nuance or tolerance of offense. Despite a language barrier considered insurmountable by most, Mira had studied the syntax, phonetics, and tonal inflections of both factions, adapting her tone and gesture to resonate with each. She understood not only their languages, but the unique psychology behind each word. However, as the two leaders sat across from each other, Mira realized a crucial piece of etiquette had been missed in the preliminary briefings. Both species followed strict ceremonial protocols for negotiations, and one detail could spell disaster: the color of the tablecloth. In Vaslishan culture, red symbolized honor. To the Zixians, it meant hostility. Mira halted the proceedings, much to the surprise of her team, and quietly arranged for a new color, neutral gray. Her instinct paid off. Both factions relaxed, and the atmosphere shifted from tension to tentative openness, with Mira chaining each sentence, shifting between dialects, and observing every detail. The factions finally spoke, not to a translator but to each other. After a grueling 5 hours, both sides came to terms. It wasn't a flashy Victorino epic battle or grand show of force. It was quiet, delicate, held together by Mira's precision and her polyglot skill. The meeting ended with a formalized pact, signed in a language known only to the two factions, but brokered by a human who could see the beauty in the smallest details. When she returned to Galactic Unison, the leaders were stunned. Mira's ability to connect across barriers had single-handedly averted a galactic war. Her gift of chaining was no longer overlooked but celebrated, a unique and invaluable asset in humanity's belt. For the first time, humanity's skill with language and detail was recognized as not only useful but powerful, a quiet strength that resonated across the stars. And from then on, humans were sought after not just for their technology or courage, but for their ability to communicate in a galaxy that had never truly known connection. The Vorics were a hyper-intelligent, analytical species with perfect memories. Their culture was rooted in absolute precision. Each word, each gesture, was calculated, stored, and compared against centuries of historical records. Their leaders prided themselves on consistency, an unbroken chain of honor upheld through exacting details. To them, one small oversight could unravel centuries of trust. The Lendari, in stark contrast, were highly intuitive and emotional. They valued passion over precision, expressing themselves in grand gestures, complex sounds, and symbolic colors. While they lacked the Vurik's obsession with detail, they had an acute sense of emotional nuance, viewing the Vuriks as cold and rigid. Misunderstandings between them had always been inevitable. When the artifact dispute arose, neither side could communicate effectively. Attempts to mediate had failed, and diplomats were left baffled. Every meeting between the Vuriks and Lendari devolved into frustration and arguments. Even with translators working overtime, words were understood, but meanings slipped through. That's when Earth's diplomatic unit, the Diplomatic Service Corps DSC, deployed Marcus Wren, a specialist who had proven that details, no matter how minute, could shift the entire course of intergalactic relations. Marcus was part of a rare cohort of human diplomats, known for seeing patterns and meanings in places where others saw only noise. His approach was meticulous. He studied culture like a language, finding connections where others saw gaps. Marcus arrived at the negotiation site prepared. Before the meeting, he requested all prior records of the negotiation, hundreds of hours of exchanges and body language analysis. The Vuriks files alone took 3 days to comb through, but Marcus knew that in the tiniest details lay hidden meaning. The next meeting was held on neutral ground, and the atmosphere was thick with tension. The Vuriks ambassador stood rigidly on one side, a towering figure in stark white robes, while the Lendari elders swayed in vibrant, flowing colors on the other. Marcus started with an observation: the meeting room's lighting, a common oversight. The Vuriks felt uneasy under bright light, due to their hypersensitivity to visual input, while the Lendari were energized by it. Adjusting it to a subdued glow struck a balance, a small adjustment, but one that calmed the room. Next, Marcus implemented a unique approach to translation. Instead of a word-for-word interpretation, he layered meaning, using human analogies and gentle gestures that conveyed warmth without overt expression. With each phrase, he read the emotions of both parties, acknowledging Lendari expressions of emotion while grounding the Vuriks in precise detail. As the meeting continued, Marcus observed how each species interacted with the artifact. The Vuriks regarded it with scientific reverence, detailing its dimensions, molecular composition, and ancient significance, while the Lendari saw it as a living symbol of unity, a representation of life and harmony. Marcus proposed a shared viewing ritual, blending both cultural preferences. The Vuriks could recite the artifact's history, but the Lendari could surround it with their sacred songs. The process was awkward at first, but Marcus carefully guided each side through it, breaking down their defensiveness in layers, slowly merging their ideas of reverence. After hours of delicate translation and ritual, Marcus noticed an opening. He highlighted the artifact's dual symbolism, both as a historical object and as a symbol of interwoven lives. A silence fell over the room as the ambassadors considered his words. In that silence, something shifted. Marcus could feel the Lendari elders' resistance soften, while the Vuriks leader nodded, appreciating the structured acknowledgement of their values. In the end, an agreement was reached, simple and binding. The artifact would remain on neutral ground, with shared rites for ceremonies from both species. For the first time in generations, the Vuriks and Lendari had found a common understanding. Word of the successful negotiation spread quickly through the Union. To the untrained eye, Marcus had only made minor adjustments, lighting, language shifts, shared customs, but these details had saved millions of lives. The Galactic Union hailed the negotiation as a turning point, and Marcus became a legend, a reminder that, even in a galaxy of grand conflicts, sometimes the smallest details mattered most. ChatGPT can make mistakes. Check important info. The Galactic Union was in chaos. Every seasoned diplomat, strategist, and peacekeeper had been called in to solve a crisis on the distant border system of Acrium V. The trouble involved the Vuriks and Lendari, two ancient species who were at the brink of war over a disputed artifact that both considered sacred. The Helix conflict was the sort of problem that made even the most experienced Galactic Union diplomats lose sleep. It was a logistical nightmare, a brewing powder keg at the intersection of two dominant species, the meticulous, rule-bound Itrani and the fiercely individualistic, artistically inclined Silansi. The Itrani prided themselves on a tradition of governance by contract, where every interaction was a binding agreement, down to the most minor detail. Their societies were governed by laws as old as their star systems, with an emphasis on unbreakable codes, meticulous decorum, and perfectly defined terms. To them, structure wasn't just a preference, it was a sacred bond. woven into their deepest beliefs. The Silaunsi, on the other hand, were bound by fluid traditions. They valued personal expression above all else, seeing rigidity as the enemy of true understanding. For the Silaunsi, words were meant to convey feelings, art, and intent. Rules could shift as easily as a breeze. Only emotion was binding. With a reverence for self-expression and nuance, they despised the Idrani's obsession with contracts and rigid codes, seeing them as little more than shackles. These fundamental differences had made it impossible for the two to reach an agreement on the disputed planets of the Kargri Belt, which held resources both factions needed. Over the years, attempts to mediate had failed time and again. Neither side trusted the other to uphold any agreement, and tensions had reached a boiling point. Humanity's ambassador to the Galactic Union, Admiral Ryan Fay, was the latest diplomat assigned to the task. Though few believed even he could handle it, Fay was known not just for his military acumen, but for his near-obsessive eye for detail. He was the kind of person who believed no problem was too large to solve if broken down into small enough pieces, and that in diplomacy, every detail was a lever. When Fay arrived on Kargri Belt Station, he set to work immediately, meeting with each side in turn. As he studied the previous diplomatic failures, he began to see a pattern. The Idrani felt betrayed when the Silaunsi ignored the fine print, while the Silaunsi felt trapped and resentful when agreements attempted to regulate their interactions down to the letter. Fay realized he'd need a solution that would not only satisfy both sides' specific needs, but also acknowledge their cultural philosophies. The day of the negotiations came. In the meeting chamber, representatives from both factions gathered, suspicious but hopeful. Idrani officials stood in formal rows, hands folded and unyielding, while the Silaunsi draped themselves in vibrant colors and flowing fabrics, watching everything with open curiosity. Fay began the meeting with a simple statement: "Today, we will draft 2 agreements, not 1. There was a murmur of confusion. 2 agreements, Fay continued, 1 for each culture. They will be identical in their binding power, but each will respect your unique traditions." He looked from one side to the other. "To the Idrani, we will create a contract, a formal document, precise and defined, with terms to the letter. For the Silaunsi, we will draft an agreement of intent, a pledge built on shared values, with flexibility for interpretation." A faint ripple of interest spread through the Idrani ranks, while the Silaunsi's eyes glinted with intrigue. Fay continued, "The Idrani contract will outline every responsibility in precise terms. The Silaunsi agreement, meanwhile, will prioritize intent over legalism, framed by shared principles and a commitment to mutual trust." The Silaunsi leader, a silver-haired diplomat named Riethrol, leaned forward. "You mean, we can hold this agreement to its spirit, not just to its words?" Fay nodded. "For the Silaunsi, yes, we will build it on a foundation of good faith, and for the Idrani, a legally binding document will be crafted, down to the finest detail, holding both parties accountable." It was a daring compromise. Traditionally, the Galactic Union insisted on uniform agreements, but Fay understood that a one-size-fits-all approach would only fail here. Instead, he proposed a dual agreement system, where each party could adhere to a version that aligned with their values. The negotiations were intense. The Idrani required revisions to the contract, adjusting clauses and sub-clauses to their satisfaction, while the Silaunsi focused on the broader meanings and intentions of each section, often discarding exact phrasing in favor of open-ended interpretations. Fay stayed up late every night, mediating every clause and overseeing every revision. He was relentless in his attention to detail, ensuring that both sides' documents mirrored each other in purpose, even if their forms differed. After 3 grueling days, the agreements were ready. The Idrani's contract was signed on a tablet of polished onyx, etched with the finest details of every responsibility and duty. The Silaunsi's agreement was presented on a scroll of woven fibers, inscribed with flowing symbols that represented mutual respect, cooperation, and understanding. At last, the 2 leaders stepped forward to sign. As the Idrani signed their contract, they were visibly at ease, and as Riethrol and our Silaunsi delegation signed their pledge, there was a sense of harmony in the room, a rarity in intergalactic diplomacy. Fay's dual approach was a first in Union history. a testament to humanity's unique insight into the importance of details not just in the technical, HFY sense, but also in the way that those details could be adapted, interpreted, and ultimately understood. The success of the agreement rippled through the Union, and Admiral Faye's compromise became a model for future negotiations. Humanity's diplomatic reputation soared, not because of any advanced technology or military prowess, but because of their unparalleled ability to look beyond the surface and see the tiny, crucial differences that so many others had missed. And in the years that followed, every peace brokered with the HFY or silence bore the signature phrase Admiral Faye had coined on the historic day: "The devil is in the details, but so is the solution." ChatGPT can make mistakes. Check important info. In the distant HFY sector, the Galactic Union faced one of its most complex challenges yet, a region rich in resources and history. HFY was home to over a dozen sentient species, each with a claim to a small, uninhabited planet called Saren 4. Though the planet was unremarkable at first glance, beneath its surface lay an invaluable resource, Varisteel, a rare alloy crucial to interstellar engines. Years of attempts to reach an agreement had failed, each species demanding rights to Saren 4. The primary conflict boiled down to three factions: the Surol, a race with a telepathic, hive mind; the Jakar, territorial beings that revered lineage and heritage; and the Silfa, nomadic wanderers with an aversion to ownership, believing in collective stewardship of natural resources. Enter Dr. R.N. Voss, a human diplomat renowned for their cultural expertise and ability to weave seemingly disparate values into a shared narrative. R.N. had spent years studying the HFY sector's history, mapping centuries of conflicts and resolutions across its thousands of worlds. This was no ordinary negotiation. The three factions were already entrenched in their claims, and no conventional solution would satisfy all of them. Upon arrival, R.N. observed each faction's interaction with a unique blend of curiosity and empathy. The Surol's collective voice expressed desire for unity and prosperity. They viewed Saren 4 as a communal resource, and their proposals all involved mutual stewardship. The Jakar, however, saw Saren 4 as part of their ancestral domain, once populated by their forebears according to ancient scripts, and the Silfa, with their philosophy of nomadic guardianship, feared any one species controlling the planet would bring inevitable environmental degradation. In the preliminary meetings, every conversation was a cacophony of conflicting ideals. The Jakar dismissed the Surol's visions of communal benefit, seeing them as invasive. The Silfa quietly rejected the Jakar's ancestral claims, seeing no place for historical ownership in a resource that would serve the galaxy's needs. For R.N., the solution lay not in persuasion, but in threads, more details, and overlapping beliefs that could be woven into a shared tapestry. They took time to meet with each faction individually, learning not just about their claims, but the values and stories behind them. The breakthrough came when R.N. discovered a unique belief common to all three factions: the thread of eternity, a cultural myth found across HFY. While the specifics varied, the core story spoke of a golden thread woven into the fabric of the universe, connecting all things. The Jakar saw it as a symbol of heritage, the Silfa viewed it as the unity of all beings, and the Surol interpreted it as the shared consciousness that bound them. Armed with this insight, R.N. proposed a new approach to the negotiation: a treaty of threads, a concept that resonated across cultures in HFY. Instead of dividing rights or assigning ownership, R.N. suggested that Saren 4 be managed by a rotating council of stewards, a group where each faction could contribute to the planet's care in a way that honored its cultural beliefs. Under this treaty, the Surol would act as Saren 4's environmental protectors, monitoring the ecosystem telepathically to detect any signs of harm. The Jakar would manage resource extraction, respecting their ancestral role and using traditional methods to honor their heritage. And the Silfa, as planetary wanderers, would oversee the rotational stewardship, ensuring that each faction adhered to sustainable practices and that no single group held power for too long. The plan was unconventional and met with resistance initially. However, R.N. focused on small rituals and symbols tied to the myth of the thread of eternity. incorporating it into each aspect of the treaty. In the signing ceremony, a golden thread was woven into the binding document, symbolizing the connection between their roles and responsibilities, a reminder of their shared goal to protect and benefit from Saren Minas for together. Over time, the factions grew to respect their unique roles. Under the Treaty of Threads, disputes diminished as each group saw itself not as an owner, but as part of an interconnected chain of stewards. Saren Minas became a model of interspecies cooperation, its resources flourishing under the watchful care of all three factions. Aren's success rippled through the Galactic Union. Humanity was now seen not just as capable negotiators, but as weavers of peace, a species with a rare talent for finding unity in diversity. And the Hadrima sector, once fractured by conflict, began to heal, bound together by the golden threads of shared purpose. In the years that followed, diplomats spoke often of Aren's Treaty of Threads as an example of diplomacy's true power, the ability to weave understanding, one delicate thread at a time. In the depths of the volatile Sharar nexus, two civilizations faced each other in a standoff that threatened to collapse the entire sector. On one side were the Torvans, a race of scholars and scientists with a society built on logical debate and precision. To them, knowledge was sacred, every discovery meticulously catalogued and preserved. On the other side were the Tyrek, warriors whose values centered on legacy and honor. Their stories were passed down orally, every word laden with symbolism, often impenetrable to outsiders. The source of the dispute was the Nexus Vault, a vast archive of ancient artifacts and encrypted texts, believed to hold technological secrets of an unknown precursor race. The Torvans saw the vault as a treasure trove of knowledge meant for study. The Tyrek, however, considered it a shrine, a place of reverence not to be disturbed. They believed only those deemed worthy by their ancestors could unlock its secrets. Both sides had sent numerous envoys, but all efforts had failed. Even the Galactic Union's best translators had struggled to bridge the gap. The Tyrek's dialect was layered with metaphor and context that seemed to defy direct translation, while the Torvans' language was so precise that any deviation from their standard definitions rendered translation meaningless. With tensions mounting, the Galactic Union turned to a last resort, Imani Zora, a human linguist who specialized in interspecies communication. Imani wasn't known just for her linguistic skills, but for her ability to decode cultural nuance. To listen for the unspoken meanings woven into language. When Imani arrived, she didn't immediately rush into negotiations. Instead, she spent days observing, listening to the ways the Torvans and Tyrek spoke not only to her but to each other. She noted every pause, every symbolic gesture, every ritual inflection. To her, words were only one part of the language. Tone, silence, and even omission held meaning, sometimes far more powerful than what was said aloud. The breakthrough came when Imani noticed a peculiar pattern in the Tyrek's language. They often repeated certain phrases in a rhythmic sequence, like a chant. When she asked a Tyrek elder about it, they explained that these phrases were keys to ancestral knowledge. To the Tyrek, spoken words held power, and only those who could speak with understanding, knowing the hidden meaning behind each key, could unlock certain truths. With this knowledge, Imani developed a theory. The Tyrek's language was structured not just on words, but on conceptual resonance. Each phrase had layers of meaning, and only those who could intuitively grasp all layers would understand the intent fully. For the Torvans, this was alien. They relied on precise definitions and rigid syntax, unable to comprehend the idea of a language that was both spoken and felt. During the first day of the negotiation, Imani requested to mediate without a translator. Both the Torvans and Tyrek agreed, albeit skeptically. Imani began by acknowledging each faction's perspective, carefully crafting her sentences to respect both cultures. When the Tyrek leader, General Rakar, spoke of the vault, he described it in rich metaphor, the heart of our forebears, buried beneath time's watchful eyes. For the Tyrek, these words held ancestral weight, resonating with their understanding of legacy and spiritual guardianship. Imani didn't attempt to translate this directly for the Torvans. Instead, she conveyed the essence, framing the vault as both a historical treasure and a living connection to heritage. The Torvans, led by scholar Irs Nalan, responded with a detailed rationale of the vault's scientific significance. 2 ears. The vault represented potential knowledge that could benefit all species, and it couldn't comprehend why the Tyrek would guard it so possessively. Here, Imani intervened by drawing on Tyrek phrases, describing the vault as a wisdom seed, a symbol the Tyrek used for growth that honored their ancestors. As the discussion progressed, Imani continued to bridge each side's words with carefully chosen phrases that resonated with the other's values. She began to speak in keys, adopting the Tyrek's layered, rhythmic language patterns, interwoven with the clarity the Torvins understood. With every exchanged phrase, understanding deepened. Both sides started to see the vault not as an isolated possession, but as a shared gift, its wisdom meant to be approached with respect and balance. Imani proposed a new solution, the formation of a joint council, where each faction would contribute equally to the vault's stewardship. The Tyrek would be the vault's protectors, honoring its sacred heritage, while the Torvins would be the scholars, unlocking its mysteries responsibly. Under Tyrek guidance, access to each artifact would require the approval of both the Torvin scholars and Tyrek elders, ensuring mutual respect and balanced preservation. For the Tyrek, this solution upheld their honor and ancestral duty. For the Torvins, it promised the scientific exploration they so desired. The council was signed into existence that day, with both sides marking the treaty in the Tyrek's keyed language, symbolizing the mutual understanding Imani had brokered. When Imani returned to Earth, her success was celebrated across the Galactic Union. Her work had revealed the strength of humanity's adaptability, the ability to speak not just in words, but in meanings that transcended language, and the Nexus Vault, once a symbol of division, had become a beacon of unity, safeguarded by both warriors and scholars alike. In the hours of intergalactic diplomacy, Imani Zora's legacy was immortalized in a phrase now adopted by the Union: the key to peace lies in learning the language of the heart.